Hi, I'm Owen, the host of the Australian Finance Podcast. This podcast is proudly sponsored by BetaShares, one of the leading providers of ETFs here in Australia. Serving thousands of financial advisors and over 1 million investors, BetaShares manages tens of billions of dollars on behalf of investors right across the country. I'm proud to partner with BetaShares on the Australian Finance Podcast, Australia's premier financial podcast, because there is great alignment in the long-term philosophy shared by both businesses. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Australian Finance Podcast.
By the end of this episode, you're going to be able to budget with a bit of confidence, and hopefully you'll walk away thinking, you know what, budgeting ain't such a bad thing, and I can use it to my advantage. Gemma Mitchell, thank you for joining me on this episode.
Happy to be here.
We're here in Sydney again, holding our microphones for those of you that are watching. We have hired an Airbnb in the Rocks, and I've got to say the Rocks is a very nice part of Sydney if you do get a chance to come out and see the bridge. Walk around to the Opera House. It's a lovely, lovely spot. Today we're talking about an episode that came about as a result, in a way, of a conversation that you've had and a story that you've had with a client in times gone by. But this idea of a budget making you cringe. And I've got to admit, I've been in this industry for a long time, Gem. I've had different budgets over the years, and every time I have a budget, I do think to myself, it's probably not the highlight of my week when I have to sit down and review or go over it. So, and my wife could attest to that. So this episode's all about that. Maybe we can start with this idea for this episode, where this came from, because I think there's an interesting story behind this.
Yes. So, just in general, my whole career, I know that the word budget makes a lot of people cringe, and I know that I'm the exception, that I love a budget. But this really, I actually had 3 clients this week alone, but it is very common, that came to me with different problems, whether it was, so one specifically we'll talk about, her problem was, I'm feeling so overwhelmed with investing. I want to be investing and I'm just so overwhelmed. I don't feel like I know enough, whatever. Others, the most common one I see is we're trying to pay off debt. We're paying off a lot of debt, but we're just not getting anywhere, or we are putting extra onto our mortgage just to take it back. We're not good at repaying debt. And the key things with this, with most people that I see, is, that's the big problem. And that's the thing that you're excited about and focused on and, overwhelmed. But that's the thing that you see as the big driver. But when we look at it, it's the day-to-day stuff that really matters. And that's what happened with this client. As soon as we sorted all of that out, and that wasn't her focus, that's not what she wanted to do. But once we did, it was like a light bulb moment. And she was like, okay, right. And I was like, all right, well, your problem's investing. Let's move on to that. And she's like, oh no, actually, I've already got the platform. I've picked the ETF. Now I know exactly how much and where it fits. All of the overwhelm was actually the little stuff, but people think it's the big thing. And I kind of think it's like going to the doctor, right? You might have some symptoms, but it's not always the problem. It's other stuff. Yeah,
you jump into Dr. Google and the doctor's like, maybe just eat better.
Yeah. So the other thing, I actually did a blog on this, and I said in it, you know how fitness people always say abs are built in the kitchen?
Yeah.
I was like, wealth is built in your bank accounts, because it totally is. Because yes, you won't get rich from saving, but if you structure your bank accounts and you've got a budget that works with your day-to-day cash flow, you can then go and do wealth building activities that you're not taking one step forward, 2 steps back.
Well, yeah, you are the queen of analogies, and here
it's
we
a new
go
one.
again.
I got it this
was
week.
Off the top of your head. That's actually, what do you say? Abs are built in the kitchen.
Yeah, that's a thing. That's a thing. Abs
thing?
are built in the kitchen.
Monique and I are yeah.
No, so it means, I'm not a personal trainer and I don't have abs, but it means that you can't outwork a bad diet. You can't go to the gym and always work on your abs if you're not eating well.
Your analogy is way better than mine. I would always say that you can't invest your way out of a savings mistake.
Yeah.
But that's a bit of a tongue twister, and you have to kind of do a double, triple take, because people think don't worry about the budget. I'm just really good at investing. I'll just invest more.
But that's like debt repayment. People are like, oh, I'm not good at savings or whatever. I'm just going to chuck more at debt. But then they end up going backwards or just treading water or not getting as far as they could if they were doing the right thing, which for exercise is apparently, and I don't do it, eating really well.
Some dietitian, personal trainer, some scientist is going to write it and be like, you guys stick to the finance.
Gemma, stay in your lap.
But maybe Maybe.
Any personal trainers out there, if you want to write in and say how you make abs, but I've heard it's in the kitchen, but I don't eat that well or go to that gym.
But it's true, right? Like, if you get a system that works for you, we will talk about this, but the idea of like a phrase of like budget. There's a lot of stigma around that phrase. And I think the finance industry hasn't done any favors to anyone, because it's kind of like, cut out the latte, cut out the avocado on toast, get a budget. You need a budget, and it's like spreadsheets, math, all these things that people are like, that doesn't sound good at all.
Got other things to be doing, yeah.
But in the recent episode, and we shared this on Instagram recently, rask.invest is the handle, you've got a phrase around how you describe what a budget is.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
So a budget is telling your money where to go rather than wondering where it went. Okay. And like for anything, you can have an allocation there, and it doesn't have to be restrictive. It might just be, this is how much I want to go to that area. And I think if you do a budget well, or whatever you want to call it, your money map.
So you mentioned the idea of a money map, right? That's really interesting, because I just asked Monique off air, if she has a budgeting strategy, and it's kind of just a general gist of where money goes. And I've got to tell you, like, I've been through all the iterations throughout my life, from 20 different rows in a spreadsheet to only 2 bank accounts to back to 20 again, now on PocketSmith, like now not using as much of a tool, then using PocketSmith again, or using another tool, full disclosure, PocketSmith sponsor of the show, and using all these different things. And sometimes it just comes back to what's comfortable, what makes you feel okay. Do you follow a budget in a spreadsheet? Is that how you do it?
I do, yeah. So I have a spreadsheet, but really importantly, like, it has to evolve. So the way that you manage money at different times can totally change. And there's going to be times in your life where things are really simple, or they're running really well, or you're totally in charge of stuff that you don't need, like, to be tracking it. Or like a budget, when it's working well, just means you're managing your cash flow really, really well. And the goal should be to forget it's kind of payday. Everything just work, but it needs to evolve. So maybe initially, it is an app, or maybe it's a piece of paper on the fridge, and then maybe it gets a little bit more complicated. Like, it needs to evolve with you, but it doesn't always mean, a budget doesn't mean allocating every dollar and then tracking every dollar. It just means you're managing your money, and you can find what works for you. Like, living at home with minimal expenses is going to be totally different to managing 3 properties and an investment portfolio. Like, you just need to adapt things and find what works for you. But the most important thing is whatever you're doing is sustainable. So when I meet with money coaching clients and they don't have a budget, and we're like, right, well, we're going to do this. Like, there is no point you spending a week doing the most detailed spreadsheet, all of it, if you're then never going to look at it again. Like, let's do baby steps and work out realistically, what are you going to do in your life? And so maybe, the tracking your expenses. Yes, some people love that, and they do that and they check it off against their budget, but maybe you don't need to. Maybe you focus on, well, I know that I constantly overspend on groceries, so I'm just going to track that for a month and see where I'm going wrong. But you don't have to do everything. You just have to find what's sustainable.
I think that's so right. We don't want to invoke too many health analogies, because every time I do this, I just get shot down in every single possible way. They're like, look at this guy. He doesn't get it. But someone once told me, because I'm pescatarian, I was veggie a few years ago and relapsed to meat, and did all these different things, right? And someone said to me that it was very apt. What they said is like, what you're doing, it's not a diet, it's forever. So you need to find the thing that works for you. Don't try and force yourself into something. Pick the thing that's sustainable for you. And I think about that in a budgeting way, and particularly dealing with that in our household. My wife's like very detailed in terms of, like, she wants to know exactly every month where things are going, where I'm kind of like, nah, it'll be okay. Like, let's just have this big bucket of money here, and then the little buckets kind of fall out of that one. And if I run that one down to 0, that means that's my money for the month. Like, because we have like a little allowance. And I'm totally cool with that. And I think what we've managed to do is kind of create this system rather than a budget. It's more like a system that's like, my kind of way of wanting to live is like, I have this little pile of money. And even though it's in the grand scheme of our incomes and our budget, it's like a very small amount of money, but it's mine. And I feel totally cool with that. And she can do whatever she wants with her little bit. Scott Pape recently wrote in his email, the Barefoot Investor wrote that like he has these like little rules, little automatic rules, which I thought was pretty cool. He was like, if it's under $100, doesn't matter. There's no regret. Just go and spend on the money. Just spend the money. Obviously, different means maybe to most people, but whatever. And then if it's over $400, they have to bring it into their date night conversation. So they talk about it. And I love those types of things where it's not really like a little spreadsheet. It's just some general rules to help guide you to a better you.
It's a respectful conversation going, how do we want to manage our money together?
Yeah.
But I love the concept of a system because I see so many people that have split up like bank accounts, which I'm big on, we'll talk about, like manage those well, but then don't have a budget. So how can that work? Or they have a really good budget, really detailed spreadsheet, but then it doesn't align with how their bank accounts are set up. So they don't work. So it has to actually be a system. So you can have the best budget in the world, but you need to set yourself up for success with then, well, how does money actually stay in that system?
Yep.
So yeah, that's what I'm really big on. Like, have your budget so you know where things are, and then align your bank accounts so that they support you and you can forget it's payday. That's the goal.
I have a question in here in the notes for today's episode, which is, I often think about this a lot, Gem, which is, and I want to ask you, do you think having a budget is about sacrifice? Because a lot of books say it kind of is. Like, what can you sacrifice?
So there's two elements to it. So a budget itself shouldn't be restrictive. That is a plan for your money. But honestly, like a lot of us, when we do a budget, especially now, cost of living and things, like sometimes you're going to do that budget and it's going to mean that you're going to have to pull back on some areas. So I don't think they necessarily go hand in hand, but it is like a fact of life. But that is not because of the budget. It's because of your lifestyle. It was happening anyway. So at least then the budget is showing you where the problem is. So the example I gave before about the people that were paying so much off their debt and not going forwards, that's because they couldn't afford to have the lifestyle and be doing that. And once we put it in a budget, they could see that. So like a budget maps everything out, and then you get the choice to go, well, what am I prepared to cut out if it doesn't work? Maybe the budget is identifying you've got X amount surplus and now you're going to invest that. Like a budget doesn't have to be negative, but I do understand that a lot of expenses are out of our control. So sometimes it feels like that's the budget's fault, but it's not.
Yeah. So that's the thing, right? Because a lot of people think about budget as like, what have I got to put into it? Like, what's the effort I've got to put in? Like, what have I got to go into this thing called a budget? And less so about what do I get out of it, which is like ultimately why we do it in the first place. Like, we do that thing called a budget so that we have a plan for our money, so we can invest more or pay down that debt to a family member or whatever the case may be. And I got to admit, like I work with the guys at Grayspace who host our business podcast with Zara. For our business stuff. And they're always like, just have 3 bank accounts for your business, one for tax, one for the general, and the other one's just like the savings account. Just no more than 3. Because they got to do all like the reconciliation and map it and do all that. I'm like, yeah, but I like to have an account that's for this one and an account for that one. And I like to do this and that. And then it drives them nuts. But for me, that works.
You've got to find what works for you. And they might be looking at it, sporadically when they're doing stuff for you, but you've got to deal with it every day. So you need to find what works for you. But yeah, a budget should have all of the extras in it. And it doesn't have to be to the dollar. Like you mentioned allowance before. So I think, like, for lack of a better word, allowance is really important. So if you're in a couple, I think you should have a separate account each that is your discretionary, that you get an allowance, whatever fits into your budget, you both get. And no questions asked, that's your spending. Whether it doesn't align with your family goals or whatever, that is your allocation, no questions asked. And you don't have to contribute that. That's, if you wanted to at the end of the week and go, oh, I've got some of mine left, let's not cook, I'm my shout kind of thing. But I think that should be yours, no questions asked, that discretionary money. So in my budget, I have an allowance for discretionary money. I'm not going, $20 on clothes, this on this. I'm just going, this is X amount, goes in your discretionary. You get to spend it on whatever you want. When it's gone, it's gone. And if there's still some left in there, there's 2 approaches. Some people might like on the day it's about to refresh, like where you're going to get paid or whatever, and the new allocation's going to come in. Some might swipe that and put it into savings or something towards their goals. Others will go, great, it's building up now, so next week I get more, or in 3 weeks' time I'll have,
Yeah.
So you just find what works for you, find what motivates you.
I actually, when we first did this budgeting plan, I think because my wife and I, we met when we were so young, we have the kind of traditional mindset around sharing money as a couple where it's like all in the same account, like everyone shares the same thing. And it wasn't until like we started doing this thing, actually we had Evan Lucas on the show, the author of Mind Over Money. Obviously appeared on the show at least at 150,000 times. Love Evan. He wrote his book and he was saying how some of the data seems to be suggesting that millennials and younger really want to have like money independence, like they want to have control over their money, even if they're in a couple. And that kind of gave me a bit more confidence to be like, well, we can share all this other stuff, but the bit that is important to me, I don't feel like I'm giving up, because even though it's a smaller amount of the overall money, I feel like it's great because I still have the aspects that I want with money. I still feel like I'm in control, but as a team, we do everything together. And so a lot of people in relationships struggle with that real bit at the start. And I'm actually reminded of you said you had that client who thought it was an investing problem when really it was like a money system problem. That I find that a lot of people that might be thinking a budget is making them cringe, they might also just be genuinely worried about something in their relationship, their partner, just even talking with their partner about money may be really difficult for many different reasons, right?
Yeah, and there's so much guilt that comes with spending and like money in general. So having your own account that well, everything else is allocated, all my bills are paid, and whatever, if that's $20 or $200, I know that that's mine for me to make a choice over. I have control over it, and I get to decide what I spend on, but everything else is mapped out. Like, I think that's really important. And it's the same with a couple. Like, if you all have joint accounts, then maybe there's a bit of resentment building if one spends freely and the other feels a lot of guilt around spending. But if you clearly kind of separate that, you have some of that, the safety, security of having your own money, but just however you feel about money, you get to decide with that. And it doesn't have to, like, the big thing is you can be a couple and be a very successful financial team working towards the same goals, having an aligned life without ever combining money. Like a young couple saving for a home deposit together, they can have separate bank accounts. They could have a joint one. They don't have to combine everything, or they don't have to combine really anything. You could be having a check-in and going, oh, what's your account up to? We said we were doing $100 a week. How's yours looking? Like, you can be a financial team without actually putting everything into one big pot.
I know you deal with a lot of people who go through like resets in their financial life, whether it's, divorce, breakups, like deaths, and just a lot of people that have to restart. Obviously our experiences shape who we are as people. Do you think that for a lot of those people, or do you see with those people that you work with, that they do have a strong bias or really do want at least some amount of money that's separate from the team money? Does that make sense?
Yes. So I'll coach even couples now. Usually it's pretty rare that people are on the same page with money. So I'll coach them now. And when I bring up, and like I was like you, like my husband and I met really young, so it made sense. All our accounts were together. But now, and I see couples like that, and I'll mention, I think you should consider having a discretionary each. And you kind of go see the relief, oh, are we allowed to do that? Oh, is that okay? And both of them actually seem really relieved with the idea. Like, nobody's ever been like, oh no, we're a team and we're because it's everything else is a team. You're getting the same amount, and it's a good thing. I think it just, people go, it's a light bulb moment, and they go, oh, are we allowed to do that? I'm like, yeah. I think that brings in it for a few reasons. One, it kind of makes you feel maybe like you can spend guilt free within a certain reason. But the second thing is for people that do come to a relationship with emotional baggage, whatever that may be, it does give them the confidence that there is some money put aside. If what hits the fan, they've got a bit of money they can do that with. Obviously, there's another idea out there, which is financial abuse, which is totally different, and there are many services available for people in that situation. There may also be instances where someone has a vice, an addiction, something like that, where that is a bigger issue in life. So you've got to protect yourself, but also be aware of that. And there are experts who can support you. But if we come back to this idea of budgets,
making you cringe, what would be some of the steps that people could put in place to get started in a more proactive way, if they don't want to use the word budget, to build a system of money?
Yep. I love the system idea. So if you have never had a budget system before, you need to start with writing down your expenses. So whether that's piece of paper, spreadsheet, whatever. But there's two ways to do it. You can just estimate going forwards, go, well, I know this is the cost of living, so I know my rates, my rego, all that kind of stuff. Or you could look past bank accounts, or you could do a bit of both. I kind of think a bit of both. Like, if I'm going to do a new budget, I'm not really looking like, oh, well, what happened in the past? I'm going, I want to stick to, like, we need to make sure it's realistic, but I might go, oh, my groceries, and I build it all out. And then potentially there's expenses there that I've overlooked or I don't know they're accurate. I might then go and check, pull out a couple of expenses that I'm going to look for in my bank account. Some people might be happy to download all their transactions and get it that way. You just need to start putting together the data. And I've got a template that we can put in because I think in your budget, because we're telling our money where to go, I put stuff like car tires. Like it's not happening every month, right?
Yeah.
Well, I hit a lot of curbs, but it's like that's in there. Christmas is in there because Christmas comes every year, and I know I have to get a domestic flight. I know how much I want to spend on the kids' presents, so Christmas is in there. Car tires, maintenance on the house. I have a Bunnings allowance of.
Do you?
Yeah, because every time I go to Bunnings for like a $5 hose fitting and spend $150. So there's $1,000 in my annual budget that goes into my bills account as a buffer because I know I'm going to go to Bunnings. So that's how detailed my budget is. And it's not me going, oh, I've got $9 this week to spend on X. It's just like throughout the year, I think this is going to come up. So I would just write down all of that stuff. And if it fits in the budget, great. If there's a surplus, let's give that a job. It's going to go to debt, savings, a holiday, investing, like give all the money a kind of job. If you do that and your expenses are more than your income, then you need to cut some stuff out. And maybe it's temporary that you cut it out. And it's like, well, when I get this under control or pay off that debt or get this pay rise, these are the things that I want to add back in, which is really nice to know where that extra money is going to go to as a motivation. But yeah, it just starts with knowing what the expenses are. And how I get my clients to do their budgets is to group things. So group things in the budget that then aligns with the bank account that supports it. So a discretionary account for each person.
So what do you mean by that? Like, what would be an example of discretionary, like at the Bunnings?
No, if you're going every week, so a discretionary is we get $100 each, and we get to, if you want to buy 10 coffees with it, great. If you want to put it through the pokies, without a gambling addiction, like no questions asked. You just do what you want. If I want to go get my nails done or buy new shoes, like
that'd be like Barefoot Investors splurge account back in the day.
Yes, yeah. And so I think everyone should have their own discretionary, that whatever works in the budget, that's just what they get to. If they want to go out for lunch with a friend, whatever. Maybe that's a gym. Maybe their gym membership comes out of that because it's not a combined thing, like whatever that is. And then I think all of the other section I have is bills. And so that's like my Bunnings, my rates, rego, stuff that's coming up through the year that I don't need to pay for all the time, but you work out how much you think that will cost you for the year. You divide it by however often you're paid. So fortnightly for most people. And so then that bills account is filling up every fortnight for expenses that aren't even coming for months. And that means when you get your rego in the mail, you're not like, oh, how am I going to fit this in my budget this week? How am I going to fit it in my pay? It's like you've been putting away the whole time.
But that's one of those problems that people have that want to kickstart their finances is in the first, month, they seem to have forgotten that, oh, my car rego, my house insurance, my insert something else is coming up this month. And it's just boom. Yeah. And one of the ways that people can overcome that is to try and do the old kind of look around your house, try and build your emergency fund as quickly as you can. Try and use, if you are in a situation where you do have credit cards and multiple credit cards or debt, is to try and figure out a way that you can consolidate or make it seem like you've got a buffer so you can have that float, as you would call it, that kind of cushion underneath the finances. It might be $2,000, it might be $500, or something to kind of create the suspension. So that if you need to draw money, you've got it there, then you pay that back first to yourself and you build that buffer up again.
Yeah, and the longer that you've had these types of things working, the more they work. Like it does take time to build them up. So yeah, if you could start your bills account with a buffer, great. But if not, the first year you might have to put a little bit extra in. But eventually, once this is all done well, it should just work, and you should just be able to forget that it's payday. Like you're going to have check-ins and things. But yeah, so they're the two accounts that I think, a discretionary each and then a bills account. And the bills account might also be like the main hub where your income comes in and then the other money goes out. But whatever's sitting in that account has a job, and at some point that expense is going to come up, so you don't touch it. Now, the other thing that I never used to have, but I'm recommending it for a lot of clients at the moment, is I think if there's an area that you constantly overspend, you should isolate it, right? So if groceries, food and fuel. So I'm recommending most of my clients at the moment have a separate food and fuel, because when I talk to them, they're the major issues. What happens if that's in your bills account is you don't notice when you've overspent $50 on groceries, but it's eating away at your rates, your Red Joe money. And then when they come up, you're like, why isn't my bills account? So I would pull the things out and put that in a separate account that you constantly overspend. This also helps with you just not having to track spending, just having a quick look, internet banking, and going, there's not enough money in that account. I must have overspent on food. Like, you don't have to go through the whole account and go, which area did I overspend? Did I spend more?
Okay.
You want it to be as quick as possible for you to identify issues. So discretionary spending each, food and fuel, I think, or whatever that thing is for you. And then those fixed expenses, the things that are always the same, could be in a bills account that you just don't touch.
Rent, that sort of stuff.
Your gym membership, your Netflix, like whatever. And you've got all your budget written down. So if you do need to pull some things out, you can start prioritizing. So
if we take a couple, we've got 4 accounts. We've got each of them would have their own account. And then for their splurging or spending, then there's the main bills account, which is for automated BPays or mortgage direct debits, that sort of stuff. Then there's the extra one, which is those actual costs, I
guess they're variable. They're house, they're like bills, but they're variable. Yeah. They're changing quite a bit.
Changing each week, yeah. Then if I'm thinking obviously a single would just have one of those discretionary accounts, but do you then isolate for things like investing, or is that money just would you automatically send that from the main account that you get paid in and gets sent to your brokerage platform or to your whatever that you're doing with it?
That's how I would do it, but it's totally up to you. Maybe you have a separate bank account where you're putting $5 here and there, and when it gets to $1,000, you're then investing. I think, within reason, you can't have too many bank accounts if you're not paying fees, but I love the transparency and seeing where stuff is.
And would you go in there and name them all
Oh, absolutely.
bills,
names, yeah.
Yeah,
Do
groceries.
not touch me, Gemma. Yeah. I think, just find what works for you. You might go, we don't need a separate one for our food. We're always on track, or we do our shop online and we stick to, just find what works for you. But it might be while you're, living at home, it's really simple. You only need one. So I've got a couple of different investment properties, and I've got a rental, I rent, and I actually have a separate bank account for them. So my rent and the bills that come for that property is
their
separate.
Own one.
Yeah. So
that makes sense.
I have for each house.
It doesn't cost you having more bank accounts.
I don't pay, no. Now, the other thing that I see trip people up is we think that we're doing good habits, but sometimes they work on paper but not in real life. And this is offset accounts.
Why?
Okay, so a lot of banks, we've talked about this before, some banks only allow you to have one offset account.
Yeah.
So people go, well, I need every dollar in that offset account.
Then it stuffs with the other system.
It doesn't work for the system because you have no transparency. You can't see what's for bills. You just see this big lump of money. And I see people that use one offset account, the pay goes in, the bills sit out, the things are in, day-to-day spending. They, most of the time, and I'm sure there's people that do it well, but most of the time I will see people going backwards because they just don't have the transparency, and they would be better to forfeit saving a little bit of interest and have different accounts that actually the system worked for them.
Yeah, that
If you
makes
can have
sense.
multiple offsets, then that's great.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, because we talked about this because I had a heap, and someone was
Yeah,
on
I had like
Instagram.
15 at one point.
Yeah, but then I moved banks, so I moved from Bank of Melbourne / St George over to NAB.
Yeah.
Because it was just a better deal for us. So that kind of went out the window. But yeah, it's interesting because you don't want to let like the little minor saving that you get from the offset account, if it's little, to kind of overwhelm the bigger picture, which is your money system.
And if you only have one, like if you can only have one offset account and you want to get the biggest bang for your buck, then you would pick whichever category in your budget was the biggest. For example, if it's your emergency fund, if the most money was going to be sitting in that allocation for the year, that's what you would use in the offset account, not your bills money that's coming and going. So maybe it's emergency fund, maybe you're saving for a holiday, and that's going to be your biggest chunk of money. Like that's what
Or
you would
tax if you're self-employed.
Yeah, exactly. Like you'd be, and that might change year to year. This is why, while we want the day-to-day to be set and forget, the strategy has to evolve as you evolve.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So separate accounts to focus on particular areas, particularly if you're avoiding overspending, which you put here in the notes, which is, okay, groceries are out of control the last 6 months. I think let's isolate that. That's in this bank account. That makes a lot of sense. For me, it's always been tax as like someone that's, because I've got my salary that I get from the company, but I also do like a bit of consulting like you do, like a little bit of stuff on the side where you have an ABN and you send an invoice off, but you got to withhold your own tax, and that often creeps up on you because you can't estimate exactly throughout the year. So that's one there. But I think one of the big things that I'm going to take away from this, Gem, is try to think of budgeting as a system, like telling it where to go, as you said, not necessarily about being reactive and not necessarily thinking of it as like a negative thing. I think the trickiest part of all this is if you are in a couple to try and bridge that gap and try and help them understand that it's also a system as well. It's not necessarily about sacrifice, because if they're not the person that listens to this podcast, they're less inclined to do that anyway. It's interesting, like, I don't make anything from saying this, but if you do want to see a coach, like go and see a coach, because that's where a coach can help. It's a lot cheaper than seeing a financial advisor, and they can help you and your partner through that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so like Lexi, one of the coaches we have on the website, we call her the cash flow queen, and she does cash flow critiques where it's like people will go, oh, here's my budget, this is what I spend. And then she'll go through their bank accounts and be like, no, you've overspent like $500 a week in this area. And so some people actually need that, like they need the accountability and they need the detail, whereas others are just like, oh, I like me, I can kind of just go, oh, I know I've been overspending in that area, I'm going to sort it out. So
Lexi is probably the type of personal trainer that I need. Like
she
for my
would
budget.
be
like, what are you doing? Let's get up. Come on, do those push-ups.
yes, that's her for your budget.
Yeah,
for
shout
sure.
out to Lexi.
But again, it's about just like doing the thing that you need. So you've got the oversight now, so you can set up the system. Just do the hard work and then let it kind of just do its thing.
So we do have a lot of resources that you can download. Our second most popular course, so number one is ETF investing. That's by far the most popular course on our website. The second is the budgeting, the complete guide to budgeting. So we'll put all the links to the free courses in the notes, as well as how you can get in touch with Gemma or I, and also the download for your money system that you give to clients would be really handy, because there's a lot of it does feel overwhelming when you first bridge the kind of gap to having a budget, so to speak, and having a system and developing that. So the more tools and tips that we can give to people, the better. So they'll all be available in the podcast player in the show notes. If you have a question or feedback on one, are abs?
How do we make abs?
How do we make abs? Number two, what is your budgeting system? Like, we've had some people share their budget with us on the show recently. We're happy to do a full episode on, let's just see what everyone thinks and how you manage it, because that's what this is all about.
Yeah, and there is no right or wrong. Like it's just what works for you, and how you do things might actually really resonate with somebody else. So it would actually be so interesting to see all the different ways.
Yeah, definitely. So you can get in contact with us. There's a link in your podcast player in YouTube that says ask a question. You can just use that as a generic way to get in contact with us, feedback and that type of thing. There's also the Rask community, or just jump onto Instagram and say, hey, this is what we're doing. Let's have at it. Let's have a chat about it. So, Gem, this has been great fun. Thank you for sharing your money system with us. It's actually a little bit more polished than mine. I think I'm going to have to go back and do a bit of a review, which my partner will be very happy about. But thanks for joining me.
No worries. See ya.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.